Jack and Tu Tien are trying to rebuild a quiet life in their small mountain home when, one evening, an officer arrives with a single sentence that tears open everything they've tried to bury. The man behind the accident that took their baby is Tone, Jack's old friend. Beside a pot of tea gone cold, Jack has to lay out everything the years of being quietly resented and undermined by Tone, and his own silence and endurance that helped push them into danger. Tu Tien must face her pain, hold it tight and carry it alone, or share it with Jack and walk with him into the coming trial. If you feel close to this kind of quiet, honest hurt, stay with their story and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. By the time the last bowl was scraped clean, night had settled over the farm. The veranda held the leftover warmth of the day in its red tiles. In the yard, the earth was dark and uneven, a few small stones catching the weak light from the single bulb above the kitchen. The hills around the house were already a solid wall of shadow. Only two sounds moved through the stillness: the soft scrape of Jack's slippers across the floor and the gentle rattle of the kettle lid on the small metal stove near the step. Tu Tien wiped the bamboo table in slow circles. Her hands smelled of dish soap and garlic. A damp towel hung over her wrist, corners dripping on the tiles. Bowls were stacked in a neat column on the counter of the open kitchen. Chopsticks lined in pairs. "Leave the rest for later," Jack said quietly as he passed behind her, picking up an empty pot. "It will smell if I wait," she answered, without looking back. He took the pot to the washing area, set it down without a clatter, and ran a thin stream of water over the burned bits at the bottom. The kettle on the stove hissed once, the lid lifting, then settling again. Outside the open front, the yard was a vague square of dark earth. The bamboo lamps hanging from the roof were off. Only the kitchen light and the small lantern under the beam cast a pool of color over the veranda. A motorbike engine grew from far on the road, muffled at first, then clearer as it climbed the slope. It was a common sound in the day, rare at this hour. The engine slowed, then stopped right outside the wooden gate. Both of them froze for a breath. The kettle lid rattled again, a quick tap as steam pushed against it. "I will see," Jack said. He wiped his hands on a cloth hanging from a nail, adjusted the collar of his shirt by habit, and stepped barefoot toward the front. The tiles were cool under his soles. He pushed the gate open with a light creak. A man stood by the gate, helmet off, one hand still resting on the handlebar of a dusty motorbike. His jacket carried a thin layer of dry earth from the road. The light from the veranda reached his face, drawing out tired lines around the mouth, but leaving the eyes familiar. "Good evening, Jack," the man said. "Officer Thu," Jack replied, surprised but not confused. "Come in." The officer nodded, pushed the bike slightly to one side of the gate, and walked up the single step to the veranda. He wiped his shoes on the edge of the tile before fully entering, an automatic respect for the house. Tu Tien had straightened up when she heard the name. She folded the towel in half, then in half again, and laid it on the back of a chair. Her heart beat harder, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "If it is not trouble, no trouble," she answered. Jack pulled out a bamboo stool near the table. Officer Thu sat down, shoulders relaxed but back straight. He looked around as he waited, eyes passing over the brick archway at the center of the house front, the tall cement pot of snake plants, the hanging baskets with sparse plants, the long brick counter of the kitchen lined with plates and pots. "You have fixed a lot since last time," he commented. "The veranda looks wide now." Jack poured hot water into the teapot, then added a pinch of loose tea leaves from a small jar. The familiar scent rose quickly, cutting through the smell of soap and cooked food. "We worked a little every weekend," Jack said. "The yard is still not done. The grass is waiting. The oven too," Thu noted, nodding toward the dome-shaped brick oven built into the wall. You bake bread there? Sometimes, Tu Tien said. When it is not too hot. Her voice was quiet. She placed 3 cups on the table, their edges precisely aligned, then stepped back to the stove to add more bamboo pieces to the fire. The kettle lid rattled as the water inside shifted. It is peaceful here, Officer Thu said after his first sip. Very different from the office. Different from the city. It is slow, Jack replied. But the slowness is good for the head. Thu smiled a little. It is good that you two are building this together, he said. A house with work from your own hands stays longer in the mind. The words were simple. To Jack, they felt like a stone placed carefully in the middle of the table, steady and neutral. To Tu Tien, they brushed against something tender. She glanced at Jack's profile as he listened, chin slightly raised, eyes tired but attentive. They spoke a few more lines about the weather in town, about the roadworks on the main street, about the price of cement. The talk floated on the surface. Under it, a quiet tension spread through the kitchen, thin but clear. Then Officer Thu set his cup down. The ceramic touched the bamboo with a soft, firm sound. I did not come only to visit, he said. Jack's hands, which had been resting open on his knees, curled into his pants fabric. I thought so, he answered. Please, tell us. Thu's voice lost its casual softness and became precise, though still low. The investigation into the accident is complete, he said. The person responsible is confirmed. He held Jack's gaze for a moment, then continued. It is Tone, your old classmate. The name landed quietly. No one repeated it. Tu Tien's fingers tightened on the edge of the counter behind them. She did not turn around, her eyes fixed on the kettle, where thin steam escaped from under the lid. He has confessed, Thu went on. All of it. The planning, the orders, the people he used. The file is finished. The trial is scheduled for next month. The house was silent. Even the insects outside seemed to fall back for a moment. Only the clock in the inner room ticked. A faint, regular sound that suddenly became noticeable. Tu Tien turned slowly. Her face was pale under the light, lips pressed together. She looked from Thu to Jack and back again, trying to connect the name, the man she had seen only in passing stories, with the pain in her body and the empty space in their life. Why? She asked, the words small. Thu did not offer long explanations. There is jealousy, he said, carefully. Old things from school, from work. He chose you. He nodded at Jack, as his target. He did not care who else got hurt. Jack's throat moved. He swallowed without speaking. We will present everything in court, Thu continued. The duty on our side is to bring the truth out. After that, the law decides. He looked at both of them, not as an officer giving orders, but as a man who had gone to many houses late at night. I wanted to tell you in person, he added, so you would not hear it in a single sentence on paper. Jack nodded once. Thank you, he said, for coming yourself. Thu finished his tea in 2 small sips and set the cup down again. He did not reach for a second pour. You should rest, he said. Both of you have been through enough. He stood. Jack rose with him, pushing the stool back quietly. Tu Tien stepped closer to the table, her shoulder brushing the corner. She wanted to say something, but the words stayed in her chest, heavy and unfinished. At the doorway, Thu turned back to her. You have been very strong, he said simply. You can continue to be strong. You are not alone in this. She nodded, eyes lowered. Thank you. He picked up his helmet, walked down the small step, and crossed the yard. The motorbike started with a sharp burst, then settled into a steady hum. The red light on the back moved away down the dark road, shrinking until it vanished behind the hill. The sound of the engine faded, replaced again by the insects in the grass and the low hiss of the kettle. A small bubble formed inside and lifted the lid with a light tap. Jack closed the gate and stood there for a moment, looking out at the shape of the hills invisible in the night. His shoulders sagged inward. The cool air touched the sweat on his neck. When he turned back to the house, he saw Tu Tien standing by the table. One hand rested flat next to the officer's empty cup. The other still clutched the towel, now dry and wrinkled. Their eyes met. He did not come closer at once. She did not step toward him. The clock ticked from the inner room. The kettle lid rattled once more. "I should turn off the stove," she said, voice thin. He crossed the veranda, passing her without brushing against her skin. He bent to lift the kettle off the flame and set it aside. The metal base scratched lightly on the brick. Behind him, she pulled out the stool where Thu had sat and slowly lowered herself onto it. The cup he had used remained in front of her, a faint ring of tea at the bottom. The small house held them in a circle of light, with the official truth now spoken and hanging in the air between the dishes, the stove, and the shelves. The tea on the table was still warm. No one reached for it. The kettle lid lay still at last, no longer rattling, the steam almost gone. They did not clear the table after the officer left. Jack rinsed his hands in the small sink, dried them on his shirt, and sat opposite Tu Tien. The bowls of rice and vegetables waited on the counter, half covered with a cloth. The air had cooled, but the smells of dinner lingered. The only clear sounds in the room were the ticking of the clock on the inner wall and the faint drip of water from the tap that never fully closed. For a while, neither of them spoke. Jack kept his eyes on his hands. The skin around his knuckles was cracked from work with concrete and tools. A faint line of flour still marked the side of one finger from kneading dough that morning. When he finally raised his head, he did not look at her right away. "Tone did not start with you," he said. "He started with me." Tu Tien watched his mouth move. Her fingers folded the towel into a tight rectangle, then unfolded it again. "He sat next to me in school," Jack went on. "Our desks touched. When it rained, the water came through the same broken patch of roof and dripped between us. He could see it clearly. The narrow classroom with the peeling paint, the two wooden desks pushed together, the way Tone always kept his notebooks in perfect stacks while Jack's papers slipped out of the edges. "We used to share food," he said. "He gave me dried sweet potato. I gave him bread my mother baked." He smiled for a second at the memory of his mother wrapping the bread in a cloth, slipping it into his bag with a few quiet words. The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "In those days, we were the same," he said. "At least I thought so." He remembered small signs now. The teacher calling his name more often when answers were right. The way classmates came to ask him for help with exercises, not Tone. The way some adults said, in front of both of them, that Jack would go far, that Jack was clever. "I did not notice his face when they said those things," Jack said. "I was young. I only heard the praise. I did not see what it did to him." After school, they walked the same muddy road home, sandals sinking into the wet earth. Jack replayed those afternoons in his mind. He saw Tone walking half a step behind him, listening as Jack talked about dreams he did not yet understand. "Later, in high school, we drifted," he continued. "He joined other groups. I kept my head in books. We still greeted each other. Nothing special. Then came university, work, projects. Years when Tone was only a name that sometimes appeared in old stories his mother told about the neighborhood. About 10 years later, he came back into my life," Jack said. "He called suddenly, said he heard about my work, said he wanted to cooperate." Jack remembered the first meeting as an adult. A cafe in the city, cold air from an air conditioner that felt strange after years on construction sites. Tone wearing a pressed shirt, smiling broadly, clapping his shoulder. "He spoke warmly," Jack said. "He said he was proud of me. He said people from our village needed to help each other." Jack had believed him. He always wanted to think the best of those who came with open hands. "We worked on some projects together," Jack said. "He introduced me to clients. He stood beside me in meetings. He said he trusted my judgment." Looking back, Jack saw the details he had missed, documents that reached him late, numbers that did not match, phone calls that ended when he entered the room. For a long time, he had thought those things were just normal mess. Sometimes people called him instead of me, Jack said. He said he was helping filter things for me. He said I was too busy. A small frown deepened on his forehead. I did not see that he was also cutting me out, he said. He changed details behind my back. He twisted my words when I was not present. He clasped his hands together to keep them from shaking. There were losses, he said. Some contracts collapsed. Someone spread rumors that I was careless with safety, that I took shortcuts. He paused, listening to the clock. Each tick felt like a step walking him back through corridors of decisions. I tried to fix things, he said. I worked more. I checked every paper myself. I thought I was just unlucky. Then he met Tu Tien. They started coming to the farm, at first as a place to breathe, then as a place to build. Bricks, plants, the first small oven, the bamboo chairs. Those were the best days, he said. We were tired, but it was the kind of tired that feels honest. He glanced up at her now. Her eyes did not look away. She did not urge him to continue. She did not let him stop. While we were busy here, he was busy there, Jack said. He was still moving things around me. I did not know the full picture. I only saw the parts in front of my face. He took a slow breath. The night of the storm, he said. All those threads pulled tight. Rain had fallen hard that evening, turning the yard into a slick surface, washing dirt into small streams. The sky had been loud. The sound of water on the metal roof had filled the house. I was supposed to meet a team in town, Jack said. There were problems with the site. Tone had arranged some changes. I saw some numbers that were wrong. I wanted to fix them before anyone got hurt. He had hesitated. The clouds were thick over the hills. The paths were slippery. He had looked at Tu Tien, at her hand resting on her belly, at the small curve that held their hope. I told you to stay, he murmured. I told you not to follow me into that rain. You needed documents, she replied softly. They were at the other house. I thought I could go and come back fast. They both knew this. They had said these sentences to themselves many times, rarely out loud. Tone knew where I would be that night, Jack said. He knew the route. He knew the timing. He told someone to create a distraction, a blockage on the road, to force my motorbike to stop. He swallowed. His voice roughened. They misjudged, he said. They did not see that you would be the one there at that moment instead of me. He did not describe everything. He did not talk about the noise, the impact, the way he had run into the emergency room with mud on his pants. Those images were carved into him already. No words could make them clearer. In the hospital, he said, I kept thinking it was a bad accident, a chain of bad luck. I blamed myself for leaving you even for a short time, but I still thought no one had meant for it to happen. His hands had held her hand on the hospital bed. Machines had beeped. Nurses had spoken quietly. Doctors had written notes. Then there had been that one calm sentence, delivered in a straight voice, telling them the baby was gone. Later, he continued, when the officers started to connect financial things, messages, movements, I saw it differently. I saw that night as the last step of something he had been building for a long time. He rubbed his face with his palms, then lowered them. I did not go to you with all of this at once, he said. You were in pain. You could not walk easily. You were learning how to live without the child. I could not put this weight on your chest too. Tu Tien's gaze dropped to the table. The towel lay between them, folded and unfolded so many times that its fibers had twisted. I carried it alone, he said. Every time I saw you watering the garden, or kneading dough, or sitting on the step, I heard a voice in my head. It said that if I had been a different man, chosen different friends, seen the danger earlier, you would never have been hurt. He looked at her finally, fully. Tonight, when he said Toen's name, Jack said, That voice came back even louder. The clock ticked. The water continued to drip slowly in the sink. "I keep thinking," he said, "that if not for me, you would still be whole. Our child would be alive. You would not wake up at night with pain in your back. You would not avoid the mirror when you undress." His words were simple, stripped of any softening. He did not hide. "I am the one he hated," Jack said, quieter. "But your body took the blow. I cannot stop seeing that difference." He fell silent. Her chest rose and fell in slow breaths. She felt a tightening deep inside, not only from the memory of physical pain, but from the sharpness of what he was finally saying. For a long moment, she said nothing. She let his confession hang in the space between them. The truth was not new in its shape. It was new in its spoken form. He lowered his head, as if expecting a verdict. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and indifferent. It had ticked on the night of the storm. It had ticked through hospital corridors. It ticked now in their small kitchen, a reminder that time moved, even when they were stuck in one memory. Jack drew a shallow breath. "If not for me," he whispered, "maybe you would have been safe." The sentence sank into the wood of the table, the tiles, the brick, into every corner of the house that had watched them these past months. It sat there like another object on the shelf, present and impossible to ignore. The ticking resumed its place as the main sound in the room. Tu Tien's eyes filled slowly. No tears fell yet. They waited, heavy, at the edge. Between them, the damp towel lay still at last. The bulb above the table cast a small, steady circle of light. Outside, the yard had disappeared, completely into the dark. Only the outline of the veranda step remained, a pale line against the black shape of earth. On the stove, the kettle had cooled. A thin metal ping rose from it now and then as it settled. The plates on the counter sat untouched. Tears finally broke from the corners of Tu Tien's eyes. They did not come as a single wave. They came in steady drops, first one, then another, tracing slow paths down her cheeks. She did not hide her face. She did not turn away from him. Jack watched, his own eyes burning. He gripped the sides of his chair, as if letting go would let everything fall apart. "I thought about this many times," she said, voice raw. "I knew there were people behind it. I knew it was not just rain and mud." Her breath hitched. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and looked down at the table. "But, hearing his name," she continued, "hearing you say all of this, it makes it different." He did not answer. He waited. "I am sad for our child," she said. "I am sad for my body. I am sad for the life we planned and did not get." The words came in pieces, with pauses between them. Each pause carried more than the words. "I am not angry that you told me," she added. "I am relieved that you are not hiding alone." Her voice broke on the last word. She pressed her lips together, then let go again. Jack moved then. He pushed his chair back and walked around the small table, one slow step at a time. When he reached her side, he hesitated, his hand hovering above her shoulder. She did not pull away. He rested his hand lightly there. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry," over and over. He stood behind her for a moment, then knelt so that his face was level with hers. He saw the redness at the rims of her eyes, the way her nose had begun to swell, the damp trail along her jaw. "You do not need to carry everything alone," she whispered. "I do not know how to do it any other way," he answered. "Then we learn together," she said. Her voice was barely more than breath, but it held. She leaned forward. He opened his arms without thinking, and she fell into them, her forehead against his chest. The fabric of his shirt grew wet where her tears soaked through. Her shoulders shook in small, hard bursts. He held her, one hand behind her head, the other around her back, careful not to press where he knew the scars still pulled when she moved too fast. He could feel the rhythm of her breathing, uneven and strained. "I should have seen what he was doing," Jack murmured against her hair. "I should have cut him out sooner. I should have—" "Stop," she said, choking on the word. He fell silent. "You can list those thoughts all night," she said, pulling back enough to look at him. "They will only grow." Her eyes were fierce through the tears. "The child is gone," she said. "No thought changes that. No punishment you give yourself changes that." He wanted to argue. He wanted to insist that his guilt had meaning, that it was at least something he could hold. Her gaze did not allow it. "If you blame yourself forever," she said, "then when I think of our child, I will see only your pain. I do not want that." She swallowed. "I want to remember that for a short time, that life was here," she said. "I carried it. We talked about names. We counted weeks." Her fingers twisted in the fabric at his shoulder. "The hurt belongs to both of us," she said quietly. "It is not your property. It is not mine alone. It sits between us." A tear fell from his chin onto her hand. "You are strong," he whispered. "I am tired," she replied, "but I am still here." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Their faces were close. There were no grand promises. There was only the simple fact of two people sitting on two bamboo stools in a small kitchen on a mountain farm, breathing the same air. After a while, she drew in a long breath and sat back. She wiped her cheeks with the towel, now damp again. "What will happen at the trial?" she asked. Jack lowered his eyes. "They will present evidence," he said. "Witnesses will speak. Documents will be shown. The judge will decide a sentence." She nodded. "Will you go?" she asked. "I thought I would," he answered. "I thought I had to face him. I did not know if I should ask you." She stared down at her hands. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that seeing him will make everything open again." "It is already open," he said softly. She gave a small, humorless breath that almost became a laugh and died. "That is true," she said. Silence folded around them for a few heartbeats. "If I stay home," she said, "I think I will sit here and imagine the courtroom. I will imagine what he looks like. I will imagine every word. It might be worse." He watched her. He did not push. "If my legs allow it that day," she said at last, "I will go with you. We will sit there together. We will listen." He nodded slowly. "We will not go to watch his suffering," she added. "We will go to see that this story is being closed on paper." "Yes," Jack said. "We will go as the ones who lived." He felt the truth of that sentence in his bones. They were still here. That mattered. A quiet resolve moved through the room. It was not strong. It was not loud. It was enough to stand on. She looked toward the door, where the darkness of the yard pressed against the veranda. "After the trial," she said, "maybe when the weather is cooler, we can plant a tree." He followed her gaze, imagining a small sapling somewhere near the edge of the garden. "What kind of tree?" he asked. "Something that grows slowly," she said. "Something that stays even when we are gone." His throat tightened. "We can place a small stone beside it," she went on. "No words, just a stone." He nodded. "Then when I water the vegetables, I will water the tree too," she said. "I will not talk to it. I will just be near." He reached out and covered her hand with his. Their fingers did not interlace fully, but they rested together. "We will do that," he said. For a while after that, they turned back to simple tasks. Jack lifted the bowls from the counter and scraped leftovers into a single dish for the dogs. The metal spoon tapped lightly against ceramic. Tu Tien carried the cups to the sink, rinsed them under the thin stream, and set them upside down on the rack. "Sit," he told her, when she bent to lift the heavy pot. "I will do that part." "You are also tired," she replied. "We can be tired in turns," he said. She hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself onto a lounge chair near the veranda edge. Her back rested against the worn wood. From there, she watched him wash the pot, careful with his movements, as if the object might break. He dried his hands, then turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the bulb above the table and the small lantern near the beam. The house sank into a softer shade. He walked to her. "Come," he said. She rose slowly. They stepped out onto the veranda, and then to the low step at the edge. They sat there, side by side, feet close to the ground. The soil in front of them was a dark, rough surface with faint lines where future paths would be. The hills were a deeper darkness against the sky. Somewhere in the bamboo to the right, an insect called in a steady rhythm. The sound replaced the ticking of the clock, which was now muffled by distance. For a long time, they did nothing. The night air cooled the heat of their faces. Their shoulders leaned slightly toward each other, not fully touching, but no longer far apart. She drew her knees closer, careful of her body. He noticed and adjusted his position so she would have space. "You kept the light on," she said softly, glancing back into the house. "I did not want the house to be dark tonight," he replied. A simple line formed in her mind, settling without effort. Pain can stay, and life can still move. She reached out, picked up a small stone from the edge of the step, and weighed it in her palm. It was smooth on one side, rough on the other. "Maybe this one," she said. "For the tree?" he asked. "Yes," she answered. "I will keep it in the kitchen until then." He smiled, a small, tired curve of the mouth that did not force anything. He watched as she stood and walked back to the table, placing the stone carefully beside the teapot. When she returned to the step, they sat again. The insect in the bamboo kept its rhythm. The hills stood around them, unseen but present. Inside, the cups were clean, resting upside down. The towel lay folded beside the sink. The kettle was cool. Nothing in the house had changed in any grand way. Yet in the space of one night, the truth had been spoken, guilt had been shared, and a small decision had been made: to stand together in a courtroom, to plant a tree, to place a stone. On the veranda step, in the quiet mountain air, they remained there until their eyes grew heavy. They rose together, closed the gate lightly, and went back inside, leaving the night to hold their whispered plans.